something kind of different than everybody else, like I had a purpose for my life, and I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I was pretty sure that it involved having a large family, getting married, but ultimately I knew that if I was not doing what God was calling me to do, then I would never really truly be happy and fulfilled. So it was not until college that I met the Franciscan Sisters of the Eucharist, and I was at university studying physical therapy, and they were this beautiful, joyful, vibrant community of women, and I loved being with them. And so I would go out and volunteer on their land all of the time. I would go to retreats that they put on about theology of the body and humana vitae. And walking away from those retreats, I was always thinking two things. And one is that these women are incredible. And two is, how do I find my husband? And so it was not until 5 years into my relationship with the sisters that I finally very clearly and very suddenly realized that the reason I loved being with the sisters so much was that God was calling me to be one of them, and that this was the more that he was calling me to for my life. So I feel like obviously God had a different plan for my life than what I had planned. And so when I was finally able and willing to surrender what I had envisioned my life to be and to really unite my will with what he wanted it to be, then that's when things started to happen. And so there's no question in my mind right now that I am more happy and fulfilled and living my gifts as a sister than I would be as a mother and wife, as wonderful as being a mother and a wife would be. That this is obviously what he had called me to do.
For more information on religious life, log on to EWTN.com/religiouslife.
Hi, I'm Doug Keck, inviting you to join me next time when I speak with prolific author Father Jeffrey Kirby about 4 of his books, Sanctify Them in Truth, Glory Unto Glory.
Here then we have the son of a virgin coming to a wedding. He himself invented weddings, instituting marriage when he was of the Father. And what did he do at this wedding? Made wine out of water. What greater deed of power could there be? He made wine of water. He could have made bread from stones. The Lord was invited and came to a wedding. Is it any wonder that he who came to that house for a wedding came to this world for a wedding? Therefore, he has a bride, whom he has redeemed by his blood, and whom he has given the Holy Spirit as a pledge. He wrested her from enslavement to the devil. He died for her sins. He rose again for her justification. The Word was the bridegroom. The human flesh was the bride. And both are the one Son of God, and likewise the Son of Man. That womb of the Virgin Mary, where he became the head of the church, was his bridal chamber. He came forth from there as a bridegroom.
It is the fascinating story of a father's journey to discover his son on the Camino de Santiago. Award-winning actor, producer, director Emilio Estevez is here to tell us why he's just about to re-release his film, The Way, in theaters. President of the Catholic League, Dr. Bill Donohue, turns a sociologist's eye on the war on virtue in a new book. Finally, why are we seeing the end of a more than 200-year-old religious order of Catholic nuns, founded by the first U.S.-born American saint? Sister Donna Dodge, president of the Sisters of Charity New York, will share her thoughts on this sad news. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to get to, but first, some news. Fort Benning, the historic U.S. Army base near Columbus, Georgia, got a new name on Thursday when it was formally rechristened Fort Moore in honor of the late Lieutenant General Hal Moore and his wife, Julia. Fort Benning was one of 2 Georgia bases picked by a commission charged with renaming military installations whose names had been linked to the Confederacy. You'll recall Hal Moore was a frequent guest and beloved one of this show. He was a hero both of the Korean and Vietnam conflicts and co-authored a best-selling memoir of his experiences, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, later turned into that hit film with Mel Gibson. I can't think of a more appropriate honoree. May Lieutenant General Hal Moore and his beloved wife, Julie, rest in peace. And my first guest tonight is an acclaimed actor, producer, director, screenwriter with such credits as The Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire, The Mighty Ducks, and his acclaimed film, Bobby. I sat down with him recently at French Crust Bistro in his adopted hometown of Cincinnati to talk about the one-night-only re-release of his most personal film, The Way, a labor of love about family and faith and community starring his father, Martin Sheen. It hits theaters on Tuesday, May 16th from Fathom Events. Here's my exclusive interview with Emilio Estevez.
Emilio, I came across an incredible quote from you. And you said, film is an illusion, fame is ephemeral, faith and family are what endure. How did you come to that formula?
Well, growing up in a show business household where my father stressed that family was important. The work, yes, is important, but at the end of the day, you are left with the people that you love and the people who love you. They're not going to bury you with all of your movies. They're not going to bury you with your work. And so for me, it was the family connection and staying close to not only my parents, but my siblings and now my children and now my granddaughter. That has always been central and a real important tenet in our family.
When we last met, and I cannot believe it has been 12 years, thank goodness we haven't aged a day.
Exactly, no, we're rotting inside.
That's right, we're rotting inside, but we've been in amber, so we're well preserved.
Exactly.
You told me at that time, when we talked about faith, that you thought of yourself as a work in progress. Do you still?
I think we're all a work in progress. Aren't we that sort of in the center of that piece of marble? We all reside, and we sort of, life sort of chips away and finds the authentic self.
But when I watch this movie again, and I just watched it again, this doesn't feel like a wandering film. This feels like it has a particular destination. Do you have a particular destination? Or do you feel you do?
I feel like I'm on this extraordinary road, this extraordinary journey where there's so many discoveries being made every day in my life. There are wonderful joys and wonderful disappointments, and I embrace the disappointments as well, because sometimes the lessons that you learn the most from are not necessarily the triumphs of your life. You have to look at every situation as a watershed for learning, for getting to whatever that next level is. And that, I think, has allowed me to re-embrace this re-release of the movie. Because, again, there was a lot of, you remember, we talked about this early days. We did a 50-day, 35-city tour for the film. We shrink wrapped this poster on the
On
bus.
a bus.
And we drove across the country, and it was Martin and I doing 2 screenings a night, doing Q&As afterwards, one secular, one non. And man, it was, I had such high hopes. And then the movie kind of disappeared, and I was very disappointed. And of course, you put all that effort into something. But then here we are. And again, it's about the journey. It's not necessarily always about the destination. I know that sounds cliche, but I think this is one instance where it's living proof of
Well,
that.
and this movie is kind of the embodiment of this, which I want to get to in a second. Your mom was a Southern Baptist. Your
That's
dad, of course, a returned Catholic, came back to the faith in 1981.
That's right.
We always talk about Emilio Estevez, the son of Martin Sheen. We rarely talk about or hear about Janet's influence on your life, your mom, who was also an artist.
Yes.
Tell me
Yes.
how her influence shaped you. You've been quoted as saying she had more
She
influence
is,
over you.
in many ways, the real artist of the family. I mean, she was a fine artist. She got a scholarship from the Kiwanis Club in Cleveland to go to New York, to go to the New School as a fine artist, and she was a painter, and that's where she met my father. But she has always stressed the importance not only of family, but of sitting together, breaking bread, sharing ideas. Every place that we would travel to, and it was always immersive travel. So my father believed that for the family to stay together, we actually had to physically stay together. So when we traveled to location, we all came along whether we wanted to or not.
On his work location. I mean, you've been to the
Exactly.
Philippines,
Mexico,
Rome,
the
Mexico.
Philippines.
I mean, you've
Right.
been on your pilgrimage for a
Dug
long
in.
time.
Exactly. So it wasn't uncommon for us to sort of dig into a community, find a house, an apartment, and then my mom would set up shop. And it was always inclusive. It was always the neighborhood kids, the locals, and so it was always her mission to make sure that we created home wherever we were, but we also created community. So I think that had a lot to do with, she was born here in Cincinnati in 1939, and then raised over in Kentucky in a little town called Salyersville. And so for her, growing up, her faith was very important to her. She didn't necessarily continue following the Southern Baptist route, but the values, I think, that she derived out of that were I think a central core to who she is now. She's all about family.
Is that part of the reason why you're back in Cincinnati? You
Yes.
moved here.
Yes.
You never grew up here.
No,
But
no.
she did.
She and my dad, Dayton, about 45 minutes away from here. So in fact, on that tour that we were talking about earlier, on that our last stop was here in Cincinnati, and the film commissioner, she said, "Hey, how about you stick around for a few days, and we'll show you what Cincinnati has to offer." That was in 2011. And I have been just having a love affair with the city ever since. It's just, I bought a house here in 2017. I've been doing all the rehab on that. But I've just, it feels, in a strange way, it feels very familiar to me. Without having lived here before, it just feels very familiar. It's a walking city. Yeah. It's a very, you can find community here.
You have dedicated yourself to independent films, despite your incredible success in studio releases, which you continue to do over your career. I want to talk for a second about Bobby, which is a film that somehow I had missed along the way, and I just saw.
Wow.
I mean, Anthony Hopkins, Demi Moore, Sharon Stone. I mean, you've got everybody.
Harry Belafonte, who we just lost.
Harry Belafonte, who just passed away.
Yeah.
An incredible cast. What drew you to that story, to tell sort of the atmospherics, the surrounds of Robert Kennedy's assassination, all the people around him, some who didn't know him at all?
That's right. So, and again, that sort of leans back into the pilgrimage, because we had moved out of New York. We'd gone to Mexico to shoot Catch-22, Mike Nichols' follow-up to The Graduate.
Yeah.
And so, and Art Garfunkel, who'd done Simon & Garfunkel's music, had been in The Graduate, obviously, and now Art Garfunkel was one of the co-stars of Catch-22, and I loved all the music of Simon & Garfunkel. So now we wrapped up shooting in Mexico. We got on a train, and as a family, and with basically all of our worldly possessions, We crossed the border on foot. We rented a car and drove to California, to Los Angeles. And my dad said, the first place I want to see before we get settled anywhere is the Ambassador Hotel. Because Bobby had just been shot and killed there the year before. So, and I remember being 6 years old and walking through the Ambassador, holding his hand, going towards the embassy ballroom, and just having that moment. Cut to 1999. I hadn't been back to the Ambassador since then. I was there for a photo shoot with Charlie for a picture we had done for Showtime, and the manager of the hotel, because it was no longer a hotel, it was just used for filming purposes, he said, would you like to see the kitchen? Would you like to see where it happened? And I said, of course. So we went down, he gave us a tour, and I began to imagine what that day looked like. And started developing the story and said, okay, who was here? How were they affected?
Yeah.
Because what we lost that night, and we all know, we lost an extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah.
I think his presidency, and I have no doubt he would have beat Nixon.
No, my pal Andy Williams was there and talks about being, held his head, was, there at the moment it happened, and it haunted him, well into old age. The other big film that I recently saw, in 2018, there was a big Library Association meeting in New Orleans. You premiered it.
That's right.
It's a movie called The Public.
That's right.
And this is about a library.
Shot here in Cincinnati.
Library. I know. Again,
right
here are all the threads coming together.
Yeah.
I love origin stories, where these stories come from. This is a story of a public library, really as a refuge.
That's right.
Not only an imaginary one, but a physical one. And
That's right.
a group of homeless people basically occupy the library during a terrible weather event. They won't leave.
That's right.
And it ends up being a meditation on the power of public places, the importance of libraries, but also our obligation to the poor.
That's right.
What made you do that? And more importantly, what's the connection between the public and the way which preceded it?
I mean, I think that it's not hard to see how I would have been influenced by my father's activism growing up. And oftentimes I would watch on TV, I'd see him get arrested. It never really made sense to me. It was always nonviolent civil disobedience. And you'd see him reciting the Lord's Prayer as he was getting carted off in handcuffs into a police car. And I thought, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? He looks insane. But over the years, it dawned on me that what he was doing was necessary. It was necessary protest. And it was grounded not only in his faith, but it was also grounded in his, I think, who he really is. My dad has always stood up for the poor. He's always stood up for the marginalized. He's always been there from the time he was a boy. He's always been that guy who said, "Hang on, I object." And so it was.
That's got to be hard to watch as a son.
It was.
And it makes sense of as a young boy.
It was. And so for me, as the public began to develop, and it started as it was a news article in the LA Times. And it was a guy named Chip Ward, who was a librarian who was retiring from Salt Lake City, the library there, and he said, on my way out the door, America needs to know that the libraries in this country have become de facto homeless shelters. And he says, I don't have the solution, but we need to start paying attention to why libraries are important. And so I was so moved by this piece, and I was looking for a follow-up to Bobby. I thought, as an independent filmmaker, it's one location, it's a lot of characters. It feels like the right follow-up. It feels like the right sort of movie to do next, to tackle next. It didn't get made in the time frame that I had expected it to, and I pivoted to make The Way instead. And The Way, in some ways, it was, I think, for me, a better follow-up to Bobby. It's a movie that takes place in the exterior after Bobby was such an interior, and it allowed me to focus on 4 characters as opposed to 22. And it got me sort of, again, trying to, learning how to make a movie with less. Because we had a small crew, we had a limited time. Natural light. In all of the elements, however they may come. And so for me, I learned how to be, I think, more flexible, more dexterous, more sort of like, okay, you know, as a filmmaker, I thought it was a really important experience and allowed me to be a better director when we tackled the public.
And no studio would touch the way when you
No,
went to them, they were just they
it's
totally
like,
missed
you
it.
want to make a movie about 4 people walking? What is that? And I said, well, it's not really walking. It's kind of a metaphor. It's kind of like the retelling of the Wizard of Oz. And here are the characters are represented in that way. And their eyes glazed over. And okay, we're not going to get any traction here. Let's just figure out how to make this, and let's go to Spain and find true believers. And we did. And it all came together.
And again, and this is the story. The Way is really the story of a father who loses a son. They were somewhat estranged. The son had been on the way, going down the Camino de Santiago, and he dies. And his father goes really to complete the pilgrimage.
That's right.
This is rooted in a personal family story, though, for you.
It is not as dark.
Yeah, thank goodness.
No, it's a little more. It's a lot more joyous.
Yeah.
My son was working as my father's assistant in 2003 during the West Wing, and my dad had organized a trip to go to Ireland and Spain, and he'd always wanted to visit the Camino because Santiago de Compostela is about 50, 60 miles from where my grandfather Francisco was born. Wow. So he had heard about the Camino. He'd always, envisioned that, someday he would walk it. But now, in his late 60s, there he is during hiatus for West Wing, and he says, "Let's just go drive it. Let's just go see what it is." My son went with him, and they were in a town called Burgos as they were traveling along the Camino, and they stopped at what's called a casa rural or an albergue, and it's where they take in pilgrims for the night and they feed them and house them and on their journey.
On their way.
And a young woman walks into the room, and my son takes a look at her, and he falls in love secretly. He comes back to the United States and says, "Dad, I'm going to university." I said, "Hang on, what's her name?" And he says, in truth, he says, "I've met an extraordinary person. He says, I want to live in Spain, and I'm out of here." So he goes to Spain. He lives there for 9 years. They got married. They got married the year that we started shooting. They got married in 2009.
Wow.
And
now you have a granddaughter.
And now I have a granddaughter, which is another miracle that came out of the Camino.
Wow.
And our experience with the Way.
Now, this is, of course, the backdrop of this, and the role you play is that of an estranged son from his father.
That's right.
That really could not be closer to the reality of you and your father, Martin, who are very close.
We are very close.
Why
yeah.
tell that story?
Well, I wanted to create, obviously, friction between the father who has this very sort of comfortable, cozy country club life. We open the movie and he's out on the golf course and he's playing with his doctor buddies and they're all making silly jokes to each other. And then he gets this horrible news and that his son has died on the Camino de Santiago. And he says, "I don't even know where that is." So what I wanted to set up was this, not only the friction, but the son was sort of this sort of free spirit.
Right.
He'd been in the world of academia and he sort of broke free from that. He was more leaning into the sort of the Margaret Mead school of cultural anthropology. So he had to see the world. And his dad really didn't understand that. And so when we pick up the story, he's been out there traveling for years and doesn't have a cell phone and he's sort of disconnected. And the father is drawn into his world. And during the course of the movie, the journey that he couldn't make to meet his son in the middle during his life, he's now forced to make the complete journey to meet him on his terms. But it's for Tom, it's for the father, not for the son.
I love how you describe it. You say the backdrop is this homage to The Wizard of Oz.
That's right.
But which somehow, even though I saw it all these years ago,
Right.
I never made the connection.
Sure.
Because I was focused on, you've got these three people who are essentially non-believers wrestling with faith and life and
right.
what this all means and their role in it. But pull out that Wizard of Oz string. I mean, you meet Jack on the road.
Well,
he's literally with hay.
That's right. And when we were scouting the location, so just to go back, Tom is Dorothy. The tornado is
The death of the son.
Toto is the box, the cremated remains, that keeps getting away. We meet the Tin Man in Sarah and her brokenness and all the gadgets that she's got on her. Her heart is broken. We meet the Dutchman. The Dutchman is the cowardly lion. He's, you know, there's that scene with El Ramon where he says, what are you all, 5? He says, no, just scared. So it's like, again, I drop these little, and when Jack, so we were scouting locations, and we were trying to figure out where we find Jack on the Camino, and we were in a van with the rest of the crew, and I saw this hayfield out, and I thought, how do we get there? That's where we meet Jack. And so everyone's looking at me, it's like, and at one point, the production designer named Victor Molero, this very gentle man, he pulls me aside, he says, I don't mean to offend, but are we telling a tale? I said, yes.
We're telling a tale.
We're telling a tale. We're telling a tale. And he says, okay, I get it now. So Jack is the scarecrow, suffering from writer's block, therefore looking for his brand.
How important are these spiritual journeys?
They're essential.
Why?
They're essential because that is the only way we get to know ourselves. That is the only way. We only come to know ourselves through the work that we do to figure out who we are. Because I think, isn't that the essential question from the beginning of time? How did I get here? Why am I here? And what is my purpose?
Well,
how can I live a purpose-driven life?
Yeah. And it restores your sense of wonder and awe, which this movie, watching it again, you're kind of in awe of the natural beauty you captured here. Yeah. I mean, and of course the finale, which is spectacularly beautiful.
In Santiago, it's just, and which we didn't have access to.
Yeah, tell us about that. It's one of those providential moments.
Well, they thought, well, if you are filming in the cathedral, we can't really control how it's going to be portrayed. And I said, listen, we're doing a movie about the Camino. We have to end. It ends here. You know that. He says, well, the Junta de Galicia, the government there, they said, we can try to help you, but we can't guarantee that you'll get access. My son and my Aunt Carmen, who lives in Madrid, and my father went ahead of us. Like, I think we were 2 days behind, and so shooting on the Camino. They leapfrogged us and went ahead and sat with the bishop and basically told him the story about how they got there. My aunt is a teacher in Madrid. My son married a gal from Burgos. And by the end of the meeting, he was laughing. And he thought, my gosh, he says, if you want to shoot here, it's yours. He says, but you only have 3 hours. So I thought, okay, we've got 10 pages in the cathedral. How in the world are we going to shoot this in 3 hours? And they said, nada más. 3 hours. I said, okay. And that included the Portico de Gloria, which is which they had not, it was still under construction, and they hadn't opened those doors. So they were sealed. They said, we'll open those for you. But that 3 hours includes that. So we had 4 cameras. We were running around like mad. And then they said, well, you still want to be one of the guys that pulls the Boto Fumero? And I said, of course. I said, but I don't really know. And the mass had already started. And they said, just follow the other guys. And they threw this purple robe on me. And I said, well, what do I do? What if the thing? They said, don't worry, just pull down, pull down. I said, okay. And while we're filming, so I'm directing. I've got 4 cameras running around. I'm hoping and praying that everybody's getting everything they need. But in the meantime, I march out there with these, other guys in these purple long robes. And I was like, okay. And I looked over at my dad, and I'm pulling his hand, and I hope we're getting this. I hope in the 3 hours that we have. And sure enough, at the end of that 3, pick up your cameras and go.
We had it all. You got all 10 pages, or you had to cut a few.
We cut a few. Yeah, we sort of, and there was no time to really work with the actors and say, this is what happens. And I said, whatever inspires you. I said, give thanks and praise. I said, whatever inspires you. I'm going to follow you around, find a seat, look at a relic, look at the grandeur of where we are. I said, I'll follow you around with the camera, whatever happens. And so Jack, the Irishman, who is, he's a non-believer. He has that moment where he's sitting in the pew and he just starts weeping. I thought, that's exactly it.
That's
of course.
There's the moment.
And Yorick, who plays, Joost, the Dutchman.
Yeah.
When the moment where he falls to his knees, it was, and he fought me on that too. He didn't want to do it. He says, well, why am I the only one who has to follow this? Why aren't the other ones doing it? I said, Yorick, I said, you're the only one who can. And again, even when he was doing it, he thought, this is rubbish. And he does it, and it's beautiful. And it's that moment where it's like, of course, he's the only one who could do it. And it's it's a profound moment. And it brings you into his spirit, I think, in that moment.
There's this setup early on in the movie that I love. And it's really the only scene you have with your dad, and it's between the deceased son and the father in flashback. Right. And the father says, Tom, my life here might not seem like much to you, but it's the life I choose. And the son says, you don't choose a life, Dad, you live one. Right. That's really the heart of the whole movie.
That is.
And moving toward, journeying and pilgrimaging toward the life you're meant to live.
That's right. And becoming a whole person, becoming that complete person that is all, it's in all of us. It exists inside all of us. We get, I think, we have an image of who we are in the world, and then we get caught up with media, with social media, with all of the noise and the nonsense. I think that, and again, I'm guilty of it too. I go down those rabbit holes, and you think, oh my gosh, what am I doing? This is not my mission. Yeah. My mission is to keep working and to keep trying to improve myself, my life, people around me, as not only as a human being, but as an artist. Yeah. And so that is the struggle, I think, for a lot of us, to remember to get out of our own way.
Why bring the way back 12 years later, Emilio? And to theaters again.
Sure. So
which is happening on May 16th.
Yeah, the film's coming back May 16th through Fathom Events. It is it's an interesting story because we were sort of resigned to the fact that the movie had disappeared. There was a term limit on when the rights were going to return back to me. However, in the middle of all of that, the film was sitting in a motion to abandon rights court in Delaware, which I didn't know about. And it was alongside 1,100 other titles. So the film was just sitting there in Nowheresville. So I got a call from a guy named Chris Bueno, who runs a boutique distribution company out of California. And he says, do you know anything about your movie? He says, it's sitting there. I think I can help you spring it loose. So we began to work on this. And this was in late 2020, 2021. And it's taken this long to sort of get it out, repackage it, reboot it. Fathom Events, they like to do what's called added value. So they said, well, what could the added value be? Maybe we'll go to Spain and we'll shoot some B-roll there, and maybe we'll interview people that have been on the Camino. My girlfriend Jackie had this crazy idea. At the time, it was crazy. She says, why don't we just call Rick Steves? Why don't we just call him? And he's the most well-known, most loved travel icon in America. If he gets involved, I'm sure he would love this movie. So I said, well, I don't have his email. I don't have his number. She said, well, I have his generic. We write him. The next day, Rick Steves calls. And he says, hey, Emilio, it's Rick Steves. I said, really? And so we had a big laugh. The next day, we were on a Zoom. That weekend, he was on a Zoom with Martin and I. And we were discussing what that would look like, what that conversation would look like. The next pilgrimage that we took was we loaded up onto the Amtrak in Los Angeles. My mom, my dad, Jackie, and I went to Edmonds, Washington, to Rick's hometown, set up cameras in his father's piano, his former piano sales room. Wow. It was called Steve's Sound of Music, where they sold pianos out of, and it's now a bar called the Church Key Pub. And we set up cameras there, and I basically was the moderator, and I sat between Rick and Martin, and I asked them questions about their life, about family, and so we shot this hour-long conversation, 20 minutes of which is now attached to the end of The Way. Oh, cool. So it's the film, yes, it's found a new life, and it's more relevant now after COVID, I think, after the lockdowns and the isolation. People are looking to get out again, but now the film has this added value with Rick. And he's sort of given it this endorsement, I think, that is very special.
But I know from people who've walked away, I haven't, that it transforms them.
It
They
does.
all get something
Yes.
on that path. What have you received from this path? Working on this movie all these years, and now
Right.
revisiting it, carrying it with you again.
I think for me, when you get the feedback, whether it's on social or emails, or my dad, he will get snail mail, I mean, weekly, where people say, your movie changed my life. Thank you for making this. This film quite literally saved my life. I don't know if I'm ever going to make another movie that has that sort of relevance and that importance in somebody's life, that they saw the movie, they got up off their couch, they got to their computer, they booked their ticket, and they went to Spain and walked 500 miles. I mean, what other movie does that?
Yeah.
Maybe the sequel.
Yeah,
Maybe
maybe
the
the
sequel.
sequel, which I hear is in the works. And
It
let's
is,
end
yeah.
with this.
Yeah.
How would you, I mean, you catch up with Tom?
We catch up with Tom. It's 10 years later. He's in Nigeria. He is
Are
now,
your lead actors willing to do this?
He is. No, he's
Okay.
he's
Martin signed on.
He's done.
Okay.
He's down to do it. He is now with Doctors Without Borders, Medicine Sans Frontiers. He's on a mission in a remote village in northern Nigeria, and he's performing cataract surgeries.
Wow.
And so it's a very personal journey. It travels not only from Africa to Europe, but goes to Dublin and Amsterdam and Brussels and Paris and arrives back in Spain on the northern route.
Big budget.
So it's a much bigger movie. It's a much more ambitious movie, but it's still, at its core, it's still about people, and it's still a movie that celebrates our humanity and our brokenness. Because again, those are the movies I make.
That's
as
your
a
way.
filmmaker. That is my way. Indeed.
Yeah.
The special re-release of The Way, starring Martin Sheen and directed and starring Emilio Estevez, hits theaters for one night only on Tuesday, May 16th, presented by Fathom Events. Check your local listings for participating theaters and showtimes, or visit fathomevents.com for all the information. I had some incredible school visits in Nashville last week. I wanted you to see a few of these, such great kids. And my final book signing at the Barnes & Noble in Cool Springs was so incredible. Thanks to all of you who came out to join me. It was a wonderful way to wrap up the tour. The Unexpected Light of Thomas Alva Edison is available now in bookstores everywhere and online. And for you moms out there, or dads who'd like a fun gift from mom, don't forget, it reveals how a mother's love and devotion turned her son into the greatest inventor of all time. You can still order signed editions at my link on the website from Premier Collectibles. All the details are at raymondarroyo.com. And of course, the book is available from the EWTN catalog or wherever books are sold. The Sisters of Charity of New York have announced that they will no longer work toward finding or taking in new members. But why? And what will become of the various ministries they've founded and supported in their over 200-year history since their founding by the first U.S.-born saint, Elizabeth Ann Seton? Joining me to discuss this and more is the president of the Sisters of Charity New York, Sister Donna Dodge. Thank you so much for being here, Sister. The New York congregation of the Sisters of Charity was founded back in 1846. You currently have a community of 154 nuns. On April 27th, the Sisters of Charity announced in a press release the following: "No longer will we work toward finding nor accepting new members to our congregation in the United States," and asks the Assembly to affirm that we continue to live our mission to the fullest while acknowledging that we are on a path to completion. End quote. Sister, this sounds like a path to extinction. Why did you all come to this decision?
A number of reasons, Raymond. We haven't had any new members in the United States for the last, for over about 21 years. If somebody were to enter now, they would need somebody to accompany them for at least 6 or 7 years in the formation process. With our median age of 85, we have nobody to do that. In addition, if somebody were to come and join us, you want to give them an experience of a vibrant living community. And more than half of our sisters are in retirement homes. So for those reasons, we thought it was unjust to accept new members. However, I have to add that we belong to a wider federation of about 13 congregations across the United States. So if somebody were to come to us, we would certainly encourage them in their vocation and direct them to one of the other congregations, because I think religious life still has a future. It might be different, but still has a future.
Sister, this is the founding congregation, though, isn't it? Isn't this the first one founded?
Yes, yes.
I want to play something one of your fellow sisters, Sister Margaret O'Brien, said in a recent interview about this decision and the changes to the Sisters of Charity since the Second Vatican Council. Listen.
I'm sure there were many times when we questioned all those changes that we made back in the 70s, the habit, leaving schools, going into other various ministries, and was there something wrong in that? But when you stop and think, you recognize that each person who did any of those things was doing it in faith, trying to read the signs of the time and do what they're called to do.
Now, Sister, you entered the Sisters of Charity New York in 1966, which was a time of great changes following the Vatican Council. Did you all have any reticence about not wearing the traditional habit or leaving the schools and the hospitals?
I don't think it's a reticence. I was one of the last groups that entered who wore the traditional cap and then went to a veil. And the main reason that we dropped that was we wanted to be closer to the people at that time. I know a lot of people had trouble with that, but we did it in good faith. We did it in prayer. When Mother Seton first came to New York, not that she was in New York, but when she sent the sisters, it was to be among the people in the garb of the day. And that for her was widow's garb. And that's why they wore the cap. So it wasn't radical at that point. It was different, but we felt that we could get closer to the people. And I have to say, just personally, I think that has worked over the years.
Sister O'Brien mentioned the disappointment that the sisters felt at not being able to be ordained priests. Was that mindset part of the undoing of the order? That the idea that there were radical changes coming and we had to embrace them early?
No, I don't think women's ordination had anything to do with that. If you see changes in the church, you see a decrease in the number of priests, you just want the people to be served. And I think some sisters felt that they had the call to serve people in that way. But that wasn't by and large a big deal for us. We never focused on it in any great way.
Sister, when I look at groups like the Sisters of Life, who are in New York, or the Nashville Dominicans, I was just in Nashville, their numbers are growing. They've got 18, 19, 20 new vocations every year. They continue to grow. Now, part of that they attribute to the sort of countercultural witness of the habit and standing apart from the world. Might that have been a mistake to abandon the habit and the difference, if you will, in the middle of the culture and among the people?
I think there are different ways of living religious life. I wish them well. I know some of them. I know they get a lot of vocations early on. I don't know their percentage of those who stay. That's something, to be looked at. But there are different ways of serving God and living the gospel, and that's one way. And they chose that, and as I said, I wish them well, and I hope they continue.
Is there any, I have to tell you, I was heartbroken when I saw this story, because when I first came to EWTN, we actually came and did a story on some of your hospitals, the housing you provide to the poor. I'm going back more than almost 30 years. So it was, as a kid who went to school in New York, I know your witness in this community, and it is a heartbreaking thing to think that this community is basically going to fold up and go away. Is there any self-reflection of what might have gone awry here, and how you would advise other congregations, other sisters, to perhaps course correct so they don't follow this fate?
I wouldn't have any advice for course correcting. A number of congregations across the United States are in the same boat. We called the question. we're not folding. We're handing on the torch of charity. We're handing on our charism to our lay colleagues, and they are doing a magnificent job in keeping the spirit and the service in all our sponsored works alive. We don't have any sisters in our sponsored works, or what were our sponsored works, but we certainly have a great number, as I said, of men and women who embrace what we have. So it's just a different way. I mean, it's the same if you look at what's happening in education in the New York Diocese, the number of schools that are closing. It's a different time, and people have to respond in a different way. And you have to believe God is in it, in all of it. And we've always been that. God has been with us for the last 200 plus years, and God's not going to abandon us now. So there might be something out there that we don't know about. But that's what we believe.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's been a huge decrease in women entering consecrated life in the past 50 years. As of 2018, the USCCB reports 45,000 sisters in consecrated life compared to 150,000 in the U.S. in 1965. As somebody who's been a religious sister during that whole period, why do you think we've seen such a decline over these last 50 years?
Well, in the United States, women have more opportunities to serve the poor, and they have more ways than our parents had or our grandparents had. And so a lot of them haven't chosen that path, but live the gospel in a different way. Those statistics are correct for the United States, but I have gone to USSG meetings, and the vocations are increasing in some of the countries in Asia and in Africa and in other parts of the world. So God's just doing something very different. We don't understand it, but we have to trust that whatever God's doing is going to turn out well.
Yeah. Sister Donna, throughout your over 200-year history, the Sisters of Charity have opened and staffed 185 schools, 28 hospitals, 23 child care institutions. You currently sponsor the College of Mount St. Vincent, and you support the Sisters of Charity Housing Development and Corporation. That provides affordable housing to senior citizens and homeless and women and children, adults with disabilities. The median age, as you mentioned earlier, is 85 of your sisters. What are the plans for the future of all of these ministries that you currently support and serve? I mean, who will take those over?
Well, as I said, we are not leading any of those. We have great men and women of the laity who have we work with, and who have the charism of charity, and they are continuing great works, and they're responding to the ever-changing needs. You look at the New York Foundling or Elizabeth Seton Children's, or as you said, housing, or St. Joseph's Medical Center. They're not stagnant, and they're not stagnant because the leaders whom we have worked with grasp the mission.
Well, Sister, I thank you for being here, for your ministry. I wish you and your sister certainly the best, but it is a heartbreaking story to see a great order in the New York area, the capital of the world, to leave us. So God bless you.
Can I just add, Ray, that it's almost a freeing experience that we can now concentrate on continuing to live the gospel message and to work for those on the margins. So it's not sad, it's hope-filled, and it's hope-filled because we know that God's with us. So we're good.
Well,
you could still continue.
I'm sad about it, Sister.
Okay.
That presence, to have religious among us. Look, I've had very close relations and friendships with religious, particularly in New York. Father Benedict Rochelle and his order, the Sisters of Life, Father Richard Newhouse. These people were so formative for me as a young person and into adulthood. I lament the loss of that religious witness and that community, because social work can be done by anybody, but praying and living in community, and then the overflowing of that to serve God is a different charism and a different movement, and that I mourn and that I'm sad about. So
but you could continue that religious witness with others. You yourself can do that, and that's what we hope happens.
Yeah, but I have a lay calling. I'm a father, and I have a lay calling. You're a sister. You have a religious calling. That's a different call, sister. It's not the same. I can't do what you do. You can't do what I do, as Mother Teresa told me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But God bless you. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Thank you very much, Raymond. Thank you.
My next guest is the president of the Catholic League, as well as a sociologist, and he has a brand new book analyzing some of the disturbing trends in our society today. It's called War on Virtue: How the Ruling Class is Killing the American Dream. We wanted to dive into it. Please welcome Dr. Bill Donohue back to the program. Bill, thank you for being here. In the book, War on Virtue, you're welcome. You contend that a progressive ideology has taken over Americans, or taken over rather by America's elites in almost every institution. And they are attacking the virtues that made this nation a world leader. Who are these elites, and why do you think they would target the bedrock of the country?
Well, the elites are the ruling class are basically the elites who run our institutions, our major institutions. And it used to be in the past that you would see this left or woke politics was prevalent in the media, the entertainment industry, education, amongst legal activist groups, the arts, and other organizations. However, the military would never get involved, the healthcare industry elites would never get involved, and the corporate 500 would never get involved. That's all changed. The ruling class now has been penetrated by a left-wing ideology. It's also part of the Hate America First crowd as well. I'm not saying that the average person who's in the Army or Navy, Marine Corps, the Air Force, that they're a problem. They're not. I'm saying the Joint Chiefs of Staff are a problem. I'm saying that the people who run the healthcare industry are a problem, as well as all the other institutions that I've mentioned. The corporate 500, they are now pushing the Equality Act, which, if it were to be passed, and Biden said he would sign it, would basically shut down Catholic doctors and Catholic hospitals because it would force them to perform abortions and sex reassignment surgeries. This would never have happened 20 years ago. Our country has changed, and not for the better.
I want to get to something you call the vital virtues. Now, these are keys for people to reach their full potential. I want to start with self-discipline. You quote President Calvin Coolidge, who said, quote, "The worst evil that could be inflicted upon the youth of the land would be to leave them without restraint and completely at the mercy of their own uncontrolled inclinations. Under such conditions, education would be impossible, and all orderly development intellectually or morally would be hopeless." Bill, we hear about students disrupting classes, speeches at the university level, assaults in restaurants. We see this walking through New York City, people getting on the subway and threatening passengers. How do you teach self-discipline to a generation that perhaps has never seen it?
Well, it has to begin in the home, and it has to be buttressed by the parents. The teachers and the clergy. And quite frankly, one index of self-discipline is homework. Who does the most homework in America? Asian American kids. Why are they so successful? Because for one reason, they come from intact families. Why do, for example, a lot of Chinese parents ask their kid to play the violin, take violin lessons? They're not interested in Juilliard School of Music. That misses the point. If you play the violin, you're going to practice self-discipline. If you learn the ethic of self-discipline, the virtue of self-discipline, that'll carry over into the workplace and to do your homework and the like. If you don't have self-discipline, that's the first of the vital virtues. You're not likely to see it. I don't care whether you could be a dentist, you could be an athlete, you could be a space cadet, whatever you might be. You have to have self-discipline. Otherwise, you are a victim to your passions. And everybody who's succeeded, and I gave another example of athletes, you've got to practice self-control, or what's also called impulse control.
In the book, Bill, you draw a fascinating correlation between self-discipline and loneliness. And you point out that one of the reasons young people find it difficult to practice self-discipline is their reliance on social media and how that can lead to loneliness. And you quote a survey of American life by researchers at AEI that found 34% of 18 to 29-year-olds, quote, rarely or never feel part of a group of friends. Now, last week, the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, released a report on how detrimental loneliness is to people's health, Bill, calling loneliness an epidemic. He had this to say during an interview with NBC.
In-person matters. Connecting online has its place, has its value, but it's not a substitute for in-person connection. We really do need both.
Bill, how do you reverse this trend, this epidemic, as he calls it?
Well, for one thing, parents have to work with their teenagers, especially teenage girls who are the most vulnerable. and you have to get them to stop relying on their phone as a form of interaction. There is absolutely no substitute for face-to-face interaction between people. And in many cases, it may be necessary to literally take the phone away from the kid. Let them have their friends come on over, play in the basement, go to the movies, things of that nature. If they're sitting at home in their bedroom and they're, quote, interacting with their social media, that means they're not having a true human experience. That would be the first thing that you have to do. And maybe you might even nudge them toward God, because the people who are the least lonely are the ones who have no religion. They're secular. They're secularists in the first place.
Yeah, the practice of religion, as you point out in the book, that also it can be an antidote to the loneliness so many of these young people are experiencing.
Yes, and quite frankly, I don't think enough parents are doing a good job on that thing. But in terms of the vital virtues, yeah, if you practice perseverance as well as personal responsibility, maybe it wouldn't be so difficult to break away from social media. But people give up. Psychologists call it grit. We call it perseverance. It is one of the three vital virtues: self-discipline and perseverance, and accepting personal responsibility for your behavior. If you do that, you're well on your way to success.
And Bill, in the book, you claim that the groups that, in the U.S. anyway, that most embody those vital virtues are Jews, Asians, Nigerians, and Mormons. How do those groups embody the vital virtues, and why, do you think?
Well, for one thing, all four of those groups have an intact family. That is to say, almost in every case, there's always exceptions, of course. In most cases, they come from a family where there's a father and a mother. I didn't say two fathers. I didn't say two parents. I said a father and a mother. And the people who come from the families where there's one parent family, which would be more typical of African Americans, are the ones at the bottom. It has nothing to do with race, all right? If you take a look at middle-class blacks and their kids, they do well in our society. They do well in school. They're not a problem involved with the law. But when you have a situation with one-parent families, you tend to have greater problems, and particularly with boys. The boys are more aggressive. They have higher levels of testosterone, and unless there's a father figure there to discipline them, they're likely to create problems.
Yeah, Bill, you grew up without a father. How difficult is that, and how do you counteract that? I mean, there are a lot of kids now growing up, half of American kids are growing up without a father, and that's an important contributor and a marker of success and realizing your full potential.
Well, that's true, and typical with a lot of kids who came from a fatherless home, I was always in trouble. I mean, my mother was a nurse, and she worked nights. I didn't see her most of the time. My grandparents came from Ireland over to the Bronx, and then Long Island, they raised me. But I was always in trouble. I wasn't a mean kid, but I was always mischievous. I was constant in trouble in elementary school. My mother had to go down there every Friday to meet with the nun and the principals. I almost got thrown out of high school, suspended. She sent me to a military boarding school, trying to discipline me. That didn't work. I went to college. I didn't go to school. I went to the bar across the street. I never went there. They threw me out of the school, and I wound up in the Air Force. And that's when, in the Air Force, during the late 60s in the Vietnam War period, I finally began to grow up. And yeah, you guys need fathers. I mean, girls need them too, but guys need fathers to discipline them. If they don't, they're subject to their own appetites.
You write this about the ruling class that are undermining the virtues that you just laid out. You write, sadly and ironically, it is those who are living the American dream to its fullest who are killing others' prospects of succeeding, especially the most vulnerable among us. The fact is, large segments of the ruling class no longer champion self-discipline, personal responsibility, and perseverance for those trying to climb the economic ladder. Indeed, some seek to destroy these virtues. Similarly, patriotism is under attack, and the ones leading the charge often occupy elite positions of power. Bill, why is it that the people who have succeeded, the ones who are considered often the most progressive, are sabotaging the working class and those trying to catch up?
Well, for one thing, there's a tremendous amount of white guilt, and no segment of population suffers more than African Americans. The subtext of my book really is that the ultimate racist in our society today, they're not some white supremacist, crazy right-wing people. There might be a few of them out there. I'm talking about the elites, the ruling class, the left elites in our society. They have basically given up on black people. They're basically saying that you can't make it like the Asians and the Jews, the Mormons, the Nigerians, and others. And that's because you don't have what it takes. You don't have the vital virtues. And this condescending, patronizing, white liberal racist attitude of not treating black people as equals, this began, quite frankly, in the 1850s. As I point out, a guy by the name of George Fitzhugh. Most Americans never heard of him. George Fitzhugh was America's... He was America's first sociologist. He regarded himself as the friend of blacks. He was a progressive. He was a left-winger. He said that black people are oppressed and I'm on your side. He was also a proponent of slavery. Now, how can you be pro-black and pro-slavery? It's not hard to do. This is the mentality of the left. Fast forward to 1988, Charles Murray, in his wonderful piece about the coming of the custodial democracy. The white liberal ruling class are now the custodians, taking care of black people. They're like the Indians that we take care of as wards of the state on the reservation. Now we're taking care of them in the urban ghetto. What it all comes down to is this. When I worked in Spanish Harlem, I treated blacks as equals. When I worked as a college professor and as the faculty advisor to the basketball team, I treated blacks as equals. I demanded that they succeed. I kept the bar where it was, and I helped them to clear it, because I wasn't condescending and patronizing. The white liberal ruling class today, in education, it's in the military, it's all over in our society. What we're going to do is write you a check, give you reparations, we're going to lower the bar, we're going to punish the Asians because they're too successful, and basically what they're saying is, you're not equal to us, and so we will force equality onto our society. That is the ultimate expression of racism.
I also want you to talk about secularism today, which operates very much like an organized religion. There are rules, there are taboos, punishments for those who don't adhere to the dogma or the ideology. How do people of faith, especially Catholics, resist this lure of secularism that seems to have taken over not only our institutions, but all of society?
Well, you either have a sense of community and civility as expressed in our Judeo-Christian heritage, and you have the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, as the guidepost, as what is right and what is wrong, and you know that there's certain absolutes in society, or you have something else which the secularists are promoting, which is basically radical individualism, where everybody makes up his own idea of right and wrong, everybody has their own moral compass, and that's what leads to this postmodern idea that there's no such thing as truth, that truth is a fiction. And if you believe that, then yes, a man can become a woman can become a man can become pregnant, a man can give birth. Now, normal people know that that is madness. Unfortunately, only 43% of our society now actually 43% of our society now is thinking maybe you can self-identify. This is sickness, and the people who are pushing this idea are members of the elite. It's not the sons and daughters of the firemen and the cops, all right? It's not Asians. It's not blacks. It's not Muslims. It's not Mormons. It's the well-educated, I say well-schooled, because they stayed in school for too long, white people who have this idea that there's no such thing as God, there's no such thing as human nature. We can make up the idea of right and wrong anytime we want. So that's what leads to it. Militant secularism denies moral absolutes. They think truth is a fiction. I keep reminding them that while this came out of Germany in the 1940s, there was a guy in the 1930s who actually said explicitly that there's no such thing as truth. His name was Hitler.
What do you hope people get from reading War on Virtue, Bill? Why did you write it?
Well, they have to understand that without the vital virtues of self-discipline and personal responsibility and perseverance, you're not likely to succeed. And if you're listening to the elites in our society who are working against it, don't trust these people with the alphabet after their name. Trust your gut. You've got to inculcate the vital virtues into your own children. You've got to maintain that they're doing it in the schools. You've got to take control of the school boards, as a lot of mothers are doing it, because the ruling class in our society has become the enemy of the traditional moral values that is the strength of this country. And we're in a culture war. Either they win or we win. And I know that's why I keep telling people there's only two choices in society left. You either quit or you fight. We're going to continue to fight at the Catholic League. And as I like to say, we're going to take them to the mat.
The book is War on Virtue, How the Ruling Class is Killing the American Dream by Bill Donohue. It's available now at bookstores everywhere and online, including EWTN's catalog at EWTNRC.com. Bill Donohue, thank you for being here.
To order this episode of The World Over from the EWTN Religious Catalog web store, log on to EWTNRC.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or call 1-800-854-6316.
I'm Tracy Sable tonight on EWTN News.